And then there's Jeff Jarrett. This was the other big story, which I think could turn out to be a lot bigger than any of us ever imagined. Right now, we don't have a lot in the way of details, but Jeff Jarrett went on Twitter Monday morning at the beginning of the week, and he announced that on December 22nd, which was a week ago, so this would be last Sunday, he says, "I officially resigned from TNA Entertainment. Thanks to everyone involved for all the fantastic memories." TNA put an official statement out later that day saying that it had accepted Jeff Jarrett's resignation from the company effective January 6th, 2014. And Dixie Carter said, "On behalf of TNA, we would like to thank Jeff for his contributions. We wish him the very best and look forward to his continued participation as an investor in TNA Wrestling," which is an interesting line for her to put in there. It is believed that Jarrett signed a non-disclosure agreement. He can't really say much right now. That's why he hasn't said anything since he posted that tweet. It's funny, Jeff Jarrett has not been on TNA television in a couple of years. He has been off television for a long time, but he has been still very heavily involved with forging relationships with other promotions like AAA. They've had a working agreement with them. Great Muda's Wrestle One promotion in Japan. Both promotions where AJ Styles went and wrestled when they were still doing the Angle, and he went and he did matches there. A lot of that, it had to do with these working agreements that Jeff Jarrett helped forge with these promotions. And he was involved in that whole Ring Ka King thing over in India, which I think lasted one season, and then Ring Ka King is no more. But Jarrett was pretty deeply involved in a lot of different affairs still to this day in TNA. We just didn't see much of him. He had only recently resurfaced behind the scenes as an agent. So he was working with a lot of the wrestlers, producing their matches and stuff, and people were, I guess, raving about the work he was doing. And it almost looked like ever since Bischoff and Hogan went away, Jarrett suddenly resurfaced behind the scenes. Maybe he was gaining more power. Maybe he was gaining more influence again. Because when those guys went away, all of a sudden you heard, Jeff Jarrett popped up backstage. And the wrestlers were very surprised because they haven't seen Jarrett in a long time. And now all of a sudden he started popping up. And to give some background here for those who don't know, Jarrett lost power, I want to say it was probably like 3 or 4 years ago. Jarrett was always a big power broker. I mean, he helped found the company with his dad. He was one of the founders of TNA. And he had creative power behind the scenes. And then there was an incident where Dixie Carter confronted him. There were some rumors that he was having a relationship with Karen Angle, who I think was going through a split with Kurt at the time, but maybe they weren't officially divorced. And it was kind of a sore spot. Maybe I don't think Kurt was aware of what was going on. And Jarrett denied it. He said, "No, I'm not. That's false." And in the end, it actually turned out to be true. And I guess Dixie was bothered that Jeff would lie to her. So he got kicked off the creative team. And he lost a lot of his power in that company. So he was gone for a while. He came back. Him and Karen became a very entertaining duo on television. This was during a period where I wasn't watching TNA every single week like I am now. But I saw enough of them to think, okay, yeah, they're pretty entertaining together as these on-screen characters. And then Jarrett went and he wrestled in AAA. He was wrestling down in Mexico. Him and Karen went down there to work. Again, that was part of the working relationship between the two companies. And actually, he came back and they did an angle on TNA television with him and Kurt Angle. So even though Kurt was not happy about the situation with his wife, it's wrestling. So you take a real-life situation and you turn it into a storyline, and those two guys made up and they worked together. And Kurt Angle and Jeff Jarrett had some of the best matches in TNA. I never looked at Jeff Jarrett as being this fantastic wrestler. I've always found him to be kind of dull, to be honest with you. He has his moments. I'm not the biggest Jeff Jarrett fan in the world, but the matches with him and Kurt were great stuff, and they had this great blood feud on television for a while. And so, again, he started popping up again in recent months behind the scenes. There was a report in the Observer, the Wrestling Observer this week, that said something major was expected to go down in TNA before the end of the year, and it didn't. And there had been rumors about TNA being up for sale. And I know there were a lot of people who did videos and stuff, other podcasts and shows who talked about the same thing. And in some cases, they were, completely appalled that these stories were even popping up. Oh, TNA's not for sale, blah, 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 all this stuff. The reality is, TNA may not have had a for sale sign outside their offices, but there were enough reports out there from legitimate sources where, where there's smoke, there's fire. There was a name that, again, in the Observer, for example, they didn't mention what the name was, but supposedly there was a potential celebrity investor that had been talked about, and then the deal fell through. Well, it turns out that celebrity investor was Toby Keith, who is a country music star. He has done very well for himself. Outside of that, he's had other business, ventures and whatnot. Forbes tabbed him at being worth upwards of $500 million. So he's a pretty successful guy and a wrestling fan. And according to these reports, he was the lead guy in the group that was looking to purchase TNA. And Jeff Jarrett was expected then to be back in some position of power in the company had that sale gone through. Because he's got a friendship with Toby Keith. So Jarrett quitting TNA would seem to indicate that whatever was going to potentially happen there isn't happening now, but it makes me wonder, what the hell is Jeff Jarrett going to do? Because Jeff Jarrett, he's not an old man. He's not an old guy. He's not going to retire. He's not going to, ride off into the sunset. Is he going to be involved with another wrestling promotion? Is he going to go work for AAA, where he was working for a while? I don't know that I see Jeff Jarrett going full-time down to Mexico. I have a tough time seeing that. He's not going back to WWE. And if I'm WWE, I don't see the value in even bringing the guy back. Vince McMahon has made peace with a lot of guys that's burned bridges with him over the years. Hogan, Brett. But he did so because it was a good business move. Bringing Hulk Hogan back, bringing Bret Hart back after Montreal all those years ago, it was good for business. He did what was right for business. What is the good business move in bringing Jeff Jarrett back to WWE? He was never a huge star there. Jeff Jarrett is not a draw. He was never a draw. And given how he left the company, I think the only way Vince would take him back and put him back on TV in any sort of role would be if Jarrett was an actual star. And he wasn't. So I see no reason for WWE to bring him back. I see no reason for Vince McMahon to want to work with this guy again. I'm not saying that years down the road they run out of people and want to put him in the Hall of Fame, but I just don't see that happening. So take WWE off the table. That's not going to happen. What does he do? Does he start another wrestling company? Why would he do that? After all the years starting TNA, struggling with TNA, the financial problems, seeing what they went through with that company over all these years, and credit to TNA, the fact they're still even alive today is a miracle. They actually do. They deserve credit for that. Because they probably should have been dead a long time ago. But somehow they have managed to keep the company going, barely maybe, but TNA 11 or 12 years later is still alive. But there's been a lot of problems. And you would think that Jarrett would of all people, be aware of this. Starting a wrestling company from scratch at a time when wrestling really isn't that hot, I mean, I don't really know how much sense that makes, unless if Toby Keith is ready to start his own wrestling company and is going to pump $100 million into it and put Jeff Jarrett in charge, then why not? Go for it. I don't know that that's going to happen, but if it doesn't, I just have a hard time seeing where Jarrett falls, unless Jarrett's going to do something completely unrelated to pro wrestling and go start a venture doing something else. I don't know what that would be. My guess is that not long after the new year, we're going to find out. Jarrett will make some kind of announcement, and we'll find out what his next move is. But it's still a pretty shocking thing that the founder of this company, the one guy who you always expected to be part of TNA in some way, and I guess he's still an investor, according to what Dixie said, although for how much longer, who knows. But the fact that this guy would just quit, it wasn't even like he was fired. He would just, on his own, say, you know what, I'm done. I resign. I want nothing to do with this anymore. I'm out. Is kind of shocking. It really is. And it's yet another sign that, boy, things must be real rough, even rougher than they would let on, when they can't sign AJ Styles and they can't even keep Jeff Jarrett around, the guy who founded the company. He basically gives up and says, I'm done. Very, very curious to see where he lands and what his next move is. And I imagine that in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we'll probably know a lot more about that.